Hello. The name of the game today is to record a video which goes over your exam questions, which have been posted last week to Moodle, and to make sure you're about on the same page with regard to what's expected here. So, your exam is due November 7th at noon, and that's already a bit of an extension for all of you. I've changed what was required due to the amount of time it took me to get through all of the grading for the last exam. So, what I'm going to do today is start off by giving you a bit of an overview of what I'm looking for in the way of improvement on this exam from the last exam. Like I say, some of you did very well on the previous exam, so to those people I say keep it up. But generally, where if you came up short, you were going to come up short, is in terms of either sufficiency or completeness. The first thing that I have to point out here is that I require 2 paragraphs in response minimum for each of these questions. Minimum. Right. And just a quick note about minimums. If you do the minimum, you can expect sort of minimal grades, right? So the trick with these questions, I require the minimum just to make sure that there's a minimum amount of sufficiency for treatment of each of these longer answer questions, which I should point out again are worth 5% of your final grade each. So doing the minimum is going to get you minimum grades. Right? So the trick with each of these questions is to break them down into their various parts and make sure you address all of the parts of the question. Also, the other thing that you should be keeping in mind is that, really you have to, in order to justify your critical assessment of this material, you have to start off by sufficiently treating the argument as it's presented by the theorist, right? So what I'm looking for is a faithful interpretation that reflects your understanding of the argument as it was presented. Right. So that is the first thing that happens before you get to the point where you're critically assessing anything. Right. So there are 6 questions, like usual, each graded out of 5 points. For a total of 30 points, and that will go into the pile of grades that you already have, and it should be quick and easy for you to determine exactly where you stand in this class. So this is all pretty standard. The other thing I'll say, and especially with regard to the Hobbs material, because I'm sure a lot of you are a little bit scared of it, beware going to online resources for this. Each semester I have a little bit of a problem with plagiarism, it seems. I have cases going before the academic review board and the dean of students office almost every semester. And frequently it's Hobbs, and people freaked out about trying to answer these particular Hobbs questions that leads people to cut and paste from these web pages. Don't do that. I'll find you. Make sure that if you grabbed an idea or an explanation from somewhere else, you reference it and tell me right where it came from. Right? Otherwise, we have a case where you're misrepresenting your work. My job is to determine exactly what you have taken and understand of this material. Right? And if what I get is somebody else's explanation of this material important to your work, I cannot tell what you know of the material, and it defeats the purpose of you writing the assignment, my grading the assignment, and it's a violation of the code of conduct, which is in the student handbook and actually posted to the syllabus with a reference. So if you're not sure how to reference, I will point out again on the syllabus, there is a link to the SiteWrite program done through the Oakland University Library that will tell you when and how to properly reference your material. Right? So it's your responsibility to familiarize yourself with these academic integrity regulations and, in fact, comply to them. Right? It's your responsibility as stated in the student handbook. It's your responsibility as stated on the course syllabus. And I'm stating again right now, it's your responsibility to figure this out and make sure you comply. So enough about that. So what you have are 6 questions, 3 on Aristotle, 3 on Hobbes. And with regard to the first 2 questions, if I had my druthers when I was organizing this assignment, I would have suggested that you answer question 2 first. I would have put question 2 in the number 1 position. But nonetheless, the reason I'm saying that is your treatment of moral virtue or virtue of character and its various dimensions as laid out by the 3 requirements, which you'll find on page 22 of your text, will set you up nicely to answer in a complete, sufficient way the question that's asked in the first position there. So what I'll do is I'll start off with question 2. Discuss what Aristotle means by moral virtue or virtue of character. So I'm looking for probably about a paragraph where you tell what Aristotle talks about these habitual dispositions to our emotions resulting in states of character that are evaluated how in terms of the golden mean of moderation, etc., etc., etc. So what I'm looking for is about a paragraph, a general sketch of virtue of character for the first part of that question. The second part of the question directs you to page 22. Aristotle adds 3 requirements to this treatment of virtue of character. So right on page 22, you'll find that weird example that Aristotle used about to be grammarians then. We have to both produce a grammatical result and produce it grammatically, that is, coming from the grammatical knowledge within us. Right? When I explain this, I frequently use the example of golf. To be good golfers, then we both have to produce a good golf shot and to produce it in accordance with the knowledge of the game of golf that emanates from us. Right? So he adds these 3 requirements on page 22. What I want you to do, what the question directs you to do, is to discuss each of these requirements. Don't just state them, but explain what Aristotle means by them and why Aristotle would find it necessary to add each. The word each is important there, of them. Right? So introduce the first requirement, discuss it, and discuss why it's important in estimating the notion of virtue that Aristotle is building here. Each and every one of them are important. So that's the second question, the one in number 2 position. Now I'm going to step back to the first question, which you'll notice is interestingly similar to your discussion forum question. So I do this for both questions 1 and 5 on this exam, and you've noticed that in previous exams as well, that the discussion forum questions are relevant to your assignments. I do this because, well, there are at least 2 of these questions. Note that this is a third of the exam that you should have been thinking about, talking about, engaging with, and already crafting your responses for the exam in terms of, right? So these questions you should be very well prepared for, right? So the question with regard to Aristotle here, Aristotle in book 1 of his Nicomachean Ethics introduces the following puzzle. And this is the first paragraph of this chapter. You see, this is the bonus of these videos. I've got all of my books right here in handy. It's in book 1 of the Nicomachean Ethics, chapter, come on, 9. How is happiness achieved? The first paragraph, which isn't a paragraph technically because it's 2 sentences long, but nonetheless, the first couple of sentences read, this also leads to a puzzle. Is happiness acquired by learning or habituation or by some other form of cultivation? That is happiness something that we can, through practice and an attempt to better ourselves, something that we can achieve through our own means? Or is it the result of some divine fate or even fortune? Right? So that already directs you on page 12 of the Nicomachean Ethics to the section where Aristotle addresses this problem initially. Right? So that's the puzzle. And I point out in the question that this is actually quite a puzzle, since Aristotle claims on the previous page in the previous two paragraphs that we need certain external goods added in order to attain happiness. He's pointing out to us that, really this isn't an airy-fairy or abstract notion of happiness. Right? Even though the definition of happiness that you've been given seems abstract, it seems almost spiritual as an activity of the soul on accord with virtue. Right? Well, the kind of happiness that Aristotle is talking about is practical, pragmatic. You enjoy the benefits of it in practical terms. So Aristotle quite consistently points out that we need a little health, a little wealth, some good friends, decent family, the material conditions for existence satisfied, right, in order to be considered truly happy. But that raises this puzzle. Is happiness something that emanates spiritually from us as a result of learning or cultivation of particular forms of habits, what have you? Or does it really come down to being lucky enough to be wealthy and able to satisfy our needs? Right? Because in certain situations, it does seem that these material conditions, satisfying them is just sort of a matter of luck. Right? So, I ask you, addressing this argument, how does Aristotle handle this aspect of luck or fortune in his treatment of virtue in the larger argument? Is the attainment of happiness, by your assessment, just a matter of luck? Now, how should you go about answering this? Well, if I were sitting down to answer this question, what I would do is first set up the puzzle. Aristotle claims over here that we need these external goods. It seems to be some kind of matter of luck whether or not these external goods are, in fact, going to be satisfied. But over here, he's talking about virtue and learning and habituation. In chapter 9, he lays out the argument for how it's better to satisfy, to achieve happiness by means of learning or habituation or cultivation of something within us, because, as he points out, virtue helps us make the most out of good luck and buttress ourselves, sort of insulate ourselves against bad luck. Right? So realistically, what Aristotle is arguing in chapter 9 is that really luck isn't something that we can court or produce or something. It strikes you like a bolt of lightning or it doesn't. Right? You can't count on it. So what Aristotle's emphasizing is his treatment of virtue, which is the aspect of our lives, of our directed activity aimed at the goal of achieving the state of flourishing that he's discussing. Right? And we can handle it. We can control it. We determine whether we develop the right habits, whether we exercise the proper prudence in our lives, and that sort of thing. We've got no control over luck. So, in order to properly illustrate this, what I might do, like I say, if I were answering this question, is to give an example of a particular virtue. Right? It could be anything, courage. Right? We could use courage as the example. I think the one that I used for my on-campus classes was loyalty. Right? But let's, just to change things up, courage. We know that courage, by his treatment that you've already addressed in question 2, if you started with that one, is that mean state that's ruined by the extremes of excess, being rash, being too fearless, right? And cowardice, the deficiency, right? So if you're courageous, right, that's the virtue. You've reacted appropriately to your emotions given a situation, right? How can courage help you? Well, take a good example. let's say, right, that an opportunity presents itself to you. Right? And let's say you've developed the virtue of courage. You're properly prudent and cautious when approaching maybe a risky business venture. But nonetheless, you've got the courage to actually capitalize on that situation when it presents itself to you. Right? Versus somebody who's rash, who jumps in to whatever fad is coming up. That is a way to really hurt your chances to flourish and succeed as a result of the luck that presents itself to you. Or, again, if you're cowardly, you're too timid to invest in Apple when it's a garage operation, for example. Right? You're too cowardly because I'll lose my $1,000 investment. I don't know if that's prudent, that sort of thing. Well, there is an appropriate level of risk that Aristotle would have you take, and the requisite virtue would be courage. Now, let's say that you are affected by something bad, right? Let's say that, what's a good example? You lose your job, right? And oh no, horrible situation. You've got bills coming, you've got a mortgage to pay, you're going to lose your house if you don't find another job, and oh no, this is a big and scary kind of thing. But a new job opportunity comes along, but you've never done that sort of thing before. Well, if you're cowardly, you're going to shy away and do nothing as a result. You're not going to go out on a limb to challenge yourself to do something new and scary, right? If you're too rash, perhaps you wind up taking any old job that's more than you can handle, and you wind up hurting your work history and your references. But the proper amount of courage, which is the mean state between rashness and cowardice, will in fact allow you to handle the bad luck of, oh no, I lost my job, in an appropriate manner. Right? So really, it maximizes your chances to capitalize on opportunity as it's presented by luck, and it minimizes your chance to be affected by the downturns that affect your life. So illustrating with an example something like that, and why not? That one's fair game. If you can explain it in your own words, I'm fine with it. But nonetheless, this is an account of how these virtues that Aristotle's talking about address these practical concerns. Now, the last part of this question actually asks you, is the attainment of happiness by your assessment just a matter of luck? What you might consider doing, because I asked this question because I'm not sure. This has been bothering me for a while, all right? So I'd like to think it through with you guys. Can you think of a situation where somebody is just so lucky it doesn't matter if they're virtuous? All right? Where the cultivation of vices rather than virtues isn't an issue because somebody is so ridiculously lucky that that luck trumps all of these sorts of forms of cultivation that Aristotle's talking about. So in that situation, is virtue worthwhile? No, it's better to be lucky than good, right? Maybe that might be a counterexample, right? Another example, is there a form of luck so bad that it doesn't matter how virtuous you are, right? The most virtuous person that this horrible thing happens to, of course, that's going to ruin a person and mar their ability to be happy. Can luck be so bad that virtue can't help you? And at that point, you've got to think more deeply about Aristotle's argument, right? Because, the cultivation of these virtues, Aristotle will claim that these virtues are not only good for what they produce, but these virtues are good in themselves. So if you're courageous, you react appropriately to the emotion of fear, it doesn't matter, right? That things don't work out for you because you've acted courageously, and there's a good in itself there in addition to the instrumental good of producing happiness or getting you what you want. Right? So anyhow, that's probably the hardest and most dynamic question that I asked about Aristotle. I leave it to you to sort of work your way through that argument because I don't have the right answer. How I'm assessing that question is based on the level of understanding that you exhibit about Aristotle's argument. Right? Now, finally, in Book 3 of the Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle makes a distinction between what he calls non-voluntary and what he would consider properly involuntary. Discuss this distinction. In the context of Aristotle's position, what does this distinction tell us about the nature of moral responsibility? Now, for this one, I'm going to direct you to the appropriate passages. And that will suffice, because Aristotle is actually really quite clear here, right? So Book 3, Chapter 1, bottom of page 31, over to page 32. Aristotle has just laid out the fact that responsibility is only for the voluntary, right? We hold ourselves responsible. Virtue is a state that we praise, and vice a state that we blame. But really, it's only appropriate to praise and blame that which we are responsible for, and he lays out the idea that responsibility is only for the voluntary, and then defines the voluntary by what it's not, right? So what he's laid out is there are only two kinds of involuntary actions. One's brought about by force, right, where you're forced to do something. It's I commonly use the example of that game that older brothers play with younger brothers, where they hold down the younger brother and make them hit themselves with their own hand and say, "Why are you hitting yourself? Why are you hitting yourself?" That sort of thing. It's clear that actions that are occasioned by force are not all that common. So a wild amount of human behavior is not explained away in terms of its involuntary nature by the account of force. The more persuasive kind of involuntary action that Aristotle introduces is those actions caused by a sort of specialized case of ignorance. Right? So this ignorance that gets you off the hook is both relevant, right? You can't just be sort of generally ignorant, right? And this gets you off the hook, right? And it is unavoidable, right? A student way in the past asked me about, well, think about this argument about ignorance. Let's say you're a cabbie in New York and you're not from New York and you don't know what the traffic signs mean. Is that kind of ignorance going to get you off the hook for whatever sort of driving infractions that you commit, according to Aristotle? The answer is no. No, because if you're a cabbie in New York, it's on you. You are responsible, and the apparatus is there for you to overcome this particular kind of ignorance. If you're going to drive my cab, right, you're going to damn well know exactly what the traffic rules are, what the lights mean, what the signs mean. Otherwise, you don't get to be a cabbie. You should have known better. So that kind of ignorance does not get you off the hook. It's only this special kind of ignorance that is both relevant to the situation and unavoidable that gets you off the hook, according to Aristotle. So, right, but there is a caveat that he adds at paragraph 13 of chapter 1 of book 3 on the bottom of 31 over to the top of 32. I'll start at paragraph 12. What is force then would seem to be what has its principle outside the person being forced, who contributes nothing. Paragraph 13 starts, everything caused by ignorance is non-voluntary. There's a new term. But what is involuntary also involves pain and regret. For if someone's action was caused by ignorance of the appropriate specialized kind, but he now has no objection to the action, he has done it neither willingly, since he didn't know what it was, nor unwillingly, since he now feels no pain. Hence, among those who act because of ignorance, the agent who now regrets his action seems to be unwilling, but the agent with no regrets seems to be non-willing. since he's another case, since he is different, it's better that he has his own special name. Isn't that nice? Well, what I want to point out to you, right, is you see the asterisk right there on page 32. Well, what you do with that asterisk is, this is book 3, chapter 1, paragraph 13, and you've got an asterisk. What you do is you flip way to the back of the book, right? And, oh, have I lost it? This is book 1. I've got the wrong bookmark. Oh, here it is. 2. Here's my bookmark. It's on my copy of the book. It's page 203. What you do is you navigate the back. It takes you to book 3, chapter 1, and then it goes through the various points where there are asterisks in that chapter with paragraph numbers for the asterisks. So on page 203, you'll see paragraph 13, for if someone's ... no pain. That's referring to the particular section that is relevant to our understanding here. And the footnote that your translator and notation maker, right, has added to this book, right, reads, the distinction between non-voluntary and the involuntary is irrelevant to the agent's relation to his action. For in either case, he's not responsible for it. So what are they saying? Okay, in either case, whether it's non-voluntary action or an involuntary action, for the action, you are straight off the hook if it's occasioned by the proper kind of ignorance. In terms of responsibility for the action, you are not responsible because it is, in fact, an involuntary action. But it is relevant to his character. If he's pleased at something he has done because of ignorance, he shows what sorts of actions he is willing and prepared to do, and is rightly blamed or praised for his attitude to these actions. This passage shows, or is one that shows that Aristotle is concerned with more than responsibility for actions, and it directs you to a note above. So, these are the passages that are relevant to determining what is going on and what sort of sense of responsibility Aristotle is fashioning by making this distinction between non-voluntary actions and involuntary actions. What sort of things are we responsible for with regard to Aristotle? Is it just the actions in themselves, or is it something deeper? That's the question that I'm hoping you will be answering. So, that's Aristotle. That is what we're looking at for half the exam. We're halfway there. That's good. All right. Now we turn to Hobbes, and what we should keep in mind with Hobbes is that we've kind of gone la, and pretended about 1,500 years of philosophy did not happen. Right? What we've jumped over is the entire medieval period. Right? So, yeah, that's what we're looking at. So we are looking at the distinction between an ancient philosopher, Aristotle, and Hobbes, a modern philosopher, who has a wholly, as you've noticed, different conception of human nature, a wholly different way of considering the benefit of actions and of activities. And he's directed towards, I think, one of the most important arguments in the whole of political philosophy. So, Hobbes. The first question in Hobbes reads, in chapter 13 of Hobbes introduces what he calls the natural condition of mankind, claiming that this condition arises as a consequence of human nature. You see what I did there? I just drew you a roadmap right through this question. Introduce this natural condition and discuss generally the conception of human nature that Hobbes relies upon as the cause of this state. So Hobbes starts off with the conception of human nature. If I were answering this question, the first thing that I would do is talk about what sort of beings humans are. And note that I posted to Moodle for you this sort of chart. It's a summary of the major argumentative move that goes on in the Leviathan. It starts with Hobbes' conception of human nature and goes right down to the distinction between a state of peace and a state of war. Other way around, actually. So, what I've done is I've prepared you really well for that question. All right, so you're doing two things here in question 4, and I would do them in the opposite order that I asked the question. I'd start off with the conception of human nature. What sort of beings are we? Well, let's start off with the empiricist principle. We're determined by objects. All thought is about objects. All knowledge finds its root in the sense impression. And largely what makes us go, what is the root of endeavor? It's appetite, aversion. We want what we want. We don't want what we don't want. But ultimately, we don't want what we want, or to avoid that which we don't want. We want to be able to avoid that which we don't want all the time. And get what we want whenever we want it. Power. Okay. That brings us up to the point where we can see what kind of creatures we are in a situation where there are no institutional structures. Hobbes lays out a number of key features of our natural state that leads us to a condition where we are, in his words, naturally diffident to one another. So what I'm asking in this question, start with human nature, give an account, and show the connection between Hobbes' account of human nature and this natural state, which is his thought experiment, which is so bad that it's going to justify whatever he wants after we address it. Right? So that's the first question in Hobbes. That's the first really important intellectual move that Hobbes makes. I want you to follow it. Question 2. This one's familiar. Hobbes, in his Leviathan, holds that humans are led by desire and that reason is just a tool that helps us helps us attain that which we desire. That's interesting. I've answered part of question 4 for you at the beginning of question 5. You see, I'm being a nice guy. Following Hobbes' line of reasoning, this leads to a position in which humans are naturally diffident to one another. Oh, you just treated that in a previous question. This leads Hobbes to argue that humans need artificial or unnatural need an artificial or unnatural bond amongst one another to present the nasty and brutish existence described in chapter 13, which you've just discussed. However, in section 17, Hobbes describes insects which need no such bond to live in peace and unity with one another. This is the too bad we're not bugs argument. Present this argument in your own words. So what Hobbes does is lays out 6 reasons why bugs get along and humans don't. All right? So what I want you to do is present that following that argument in your own words. Second part of the question. How are we different from these bugs and why do we have such a hard time of peace? By Hobbes' argument. So what I want you to do after you've addressed the first part of the question is take a step back and think to yourself if there is something specific in human beings, which I've addressed in the video lectures and which I've addressed in class, that brings us to a state in which we have a hard time attaining peace. But that's lacking in these bugs and makes it easier for them to cooperate towards a common good. So that's what we're looking at with that question, right? And again, this is your discussion forum question. You've been thinking about this for a while. You've been engaging with this question. You should be pretty well prepared. I handled it in the video lecture and in class for those of you that have the in-class meeting. So you should be very well prepared for this question. And then finally, question 6. Why does Hobbes claim that we have to submit to a sovereign authority? I just came right out and asked that, right? This is an overview question. It takes into account the previous 2 questions, but nonetheless, why do we have to submit to a sovereign authority? Well, chapter 17 lays out a couple of other options with regard to the kinds of authority that we can submit to. Well, problematically, each of these conditional or limited submissions to authority by Hobbes' argument are insufficient. Right? So he claims that we actually have to, on page 227, enter this covenant, the Commonwealth Agreement. I agree to authorize this person. It's on page 227 anyway, right? Just as long as you authorize this person, right? So second part, so trace that argument, right? So since we're such nasty creatures, and since the state of nature is so bad, realistically we know that the state of peace is in our best interest, right? So how do we get to this state of peace? Well, Hobbes claims that we have to enter into this Commonwealth Agreement and authorize one person or an assembly of people, right? And in so doing, create an artificial person that is this amalgam of the multitude of people, right? And that person would be sovereign and have absolute power, right? So that's Hobbes' argument. Second part, right? And at that point, in the first part, you should address the Commonwealth Agreement as well. Right? I authorize and give up my right to govern myself to this man or this assembly of men on this condition that you give up your right to govern yourself and authorize his actions in like manner. That's page 227 of your text. That should be already sort of rattling around in your head. Right? So, address that. Secondly, is the covenant that establishes this sovereign authority. You see why I bring up the fact that you have to address this covenant? Because this agreement on 227 is the covenant, right? Is this covenant that establishes sovereign authority consistent with the laws of nature? And by the laws of nature, I don't mean the bloody 19 of them that Hobbes introduces and then finally at the end of chapter 15 says, and so forth. All right. The two of them that he raises in chapter 14 are the ones that I'm talking about. Evaluate those two. Limit yourself to those two. Seek peace and follow it when others do so too. But if you do not have a hope of attaining peace, use all of the helps and advantages of war. That's the first law of nature. The second law of nature has to do with laying down rights only insofar forth as others laid down the same rights and you're to benefit by doing so. Right? So off the cuff, it seems like this Commonwealth Agreement is one in which we all lay down all of our rights to this sovereign. But, I mean, think about it. What did the sovereign agree to do in exchange for all of these rights we've just laid down? And what rights did the sovereign lay down? There's something kind of fishy going on there, right? And this question asks you to think through that something fishy. So, that's your exam. This exam makes 2/3 of the way through the class. This exam is due by November 7th at noon. Submit your responses to Moodle by this date in .doc, .docx, PDF, or .txt format. That .odt format, again, in last exam I had some problems with students submitting incomplete exams, thinking they were completing incomplete exams. So it's watch and be very careful. If you're using Open Freely, I can open it, but it doesn't always save all of your work, right? And this causes problems. The other thing that I want to say, policies are in effect for if you're going to miss this deadline, but with the amount of extra time that I've given you for this exam, you've had the questions by the time you submit for over a week. You should be able to plan your schedules, plan ahead, and submit your exams by November 7th. By noon, and hopefully I won't have to give the number of extensions that I gave the last time. That's one of the things that held me up with the grading for the last exam, because if I start releasing grades, then I don't know who talks to who, and you could inadvertently give one of your classmates a hint and a leg up on this exam. And that's plain old not fair. Like always, please contact me via email if you have any questions whatsoever about this exam or what's expected of you. Or, God, I love questions about the material. You're trying to work through a question with Hobbs. This is why I got into this profession, because I like working through this material. So please, please, please contact me about your understanding of the material. Also, I have on-campus office hours. On Monday, my office hours are moved back. I'm going to try to be there between noon and 1. Like I say, I've got a doctor's appointment in the morning. So my regular office hours have been slightly moved, but if you're unable to come then, or if the sky falls and I'm unable to come then, I'm going to do additional office hours after my afternoon class from 2:30 till 4. So I'll be in my office, which is 319 O'Dowd Hall. Please come see me. Email me if you have a problem. My office hours, are, as posted on the syllabus, are Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So Wednesday, we're back to regular office hours. Anyone meeting with me on Wednesday in an in-class meeting will have time for review. So that's a good time for questions to arise as well. So, I hope that you find this exam both challenging and interesting. I know that's maybe not what you're looking for out of one of these exams. Easy and good grades might be preferable, but these courses have to be challenging. So, you have a good rest of your weekend, and I'll talk to you or look forward to reading your exams. Thanks. There it is.